whereas the new generation of solar photovoltaic panels includes excessive amount of lead in it because it is more efficient in converting solar energy to electrical energy. But we have to be aware that this efficiency comes with a price. The price is that we are introducing a very toxic metal into our solar panels. Future purposes for solar panels, for batteries, and so forth, we should not only consider the efficiency, the engineering aspect of it, but also the toxicological and environmental aspect of it.
Thank you for joining the Change I Am Possible, which is India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. I'm your host, Erel, and today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Yigal Eral, who is a geology professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem's Institute of Earth Sciences, who studies the toxic effect of lead. So thank you for being part of the show. For the audience sake, could you give a little context on who you are with a brief intro, what you do and your expertise in the space?
I'm a geochemist by training, which means that I reside in the interface between geology and chemistry. And I focus mostly on the fate of metals in the environment. Both toxic and essential metals are nutrients, but some of them are extremely toxic, such as lead. I was trained both in Israel and in the US. I obtained my PhD at Caltech in Pasadena, California, working with one of the leading figures of geochemistry and environmental science of the 20th century, the late Claire Patterson and the late G. Morgan, both of which well known in their fields. Claire Patterson was the first one who dated the age of the Earth. And after he managed to do it, he basically turned his attention to the fate of lead in the environment. He basically, while trying to date the age of the Earth, he ran into a technical problem with a lot of contamination of lead reaching his laboratory in Pasadena. And he was wondering how far this pollution gets, how far in the world it gets. And he went to the most remote places in the world, tracing down the extent of lead pollution, both in space, and also he went down in cores of ice and sediments and studied it as a function of time, and basically established the framework of lead pollution, which was global in its extent and also going deep in time. Basically, he said that about 5,000 years ago, when people at the dawn of the metallurgical era started a process called compilation, which allowed them to melt lead-rich minerals and extract from them silver. They were interested in the silver. In the process, they had to produce a lot of lead as a byproduct. And in doing so, they not knowingly started to pollute the environment and themselves. And he and his collaborator, Dorothy Settle, published a paper 41 years ago in Science in 1980, where they basically created a curve describing the rate of lead pollution over time, going back 5,000 years and even more. Showing that until 5,000 years, there was almost no lead production. But from 5,000 years ago, lead was produced in higher and higher quantities because people were interested in silver, and they basically had to look for lead to find the silver they were after. And therefore, for instance, the invention of coins 2,500 years ago made a huge increase in the rate of lead production because people needed more silver to produce their coins and so forth. And of course, the Roman Empire was the prime producer of metals, including lead. And now what we did is about 2 years ago, we obtained skeletons of people buried in Rome, going back 10 or more than 10,000 years in time. And we analyzed the amount of lead in their bones. And we basically were able to mimic the curve that Patterson showed 40 years ago about lead pollution production. Basically, the extent of pollution in humans reflects the extent or the rate of lead production. And this is what we actually published. And the most important lesson from this is what is expecting us in the near future, because we have to move to alternative energy society. You know, that most of the energy will come not from fossil fuels, but from replenished, recycled sources such as solar panels and wind turbines and so forth. All these require extensive amount of metals in them, including lead, not only lead, but other metals as well. And if we not pay attention to the fact that the more lead and other metals we produce, the more we are going to absorb in our bodies, we will, in this process, risk ourselves, especially communities of people who are engaged in mining, who work in recycling plants, maintain solar fields, because whereas the new generation of solar photovoltaic panels includes excessive amount of lead in it, because it is more efficient in converting solar energy to electrical energy. But we have to be aware that this efficiency comes with a price. The price is that we are introducing a very toxic metal into our solar panels. And as long as the panels are working and functioning and not broken, everything is fine. But what happens if some of them break down and release their constituents to the environment? So basically, we're introducing a new source of pollution. We have to be aware of it. And maybe in the selection of metals for future purposes, for solar panels, for batteries, and so forth, we should not only consider the efficiency, the engineering aspect of it, but also the toxicological and environmental aspect of it.
This is like been happening over the 5,000 year period. It's not a recent phenomena. And you and your seniors have conducted various research and figured out that this is a growing source of problem, which is a new source of pollution. And where the future is going, where we are at the cusp of transitioning from a fossil fuel to a clean energy, and you saying that this future that we get into, which we say like solar panels and will give you abundance of electricity and so forth, is going to be a source of this new pollution that we're creating. Is there any alternate to the metals that we are currently using? And could you talk a little bit more about this recent study? How and where was the study conducted?
Yes, there are alternatives, but you have to search for them. If you are narrow-minded and you as an engineer or as a physicist, you want to develop the best solar panel on Earth. regardless of what it is made of. You want the most efficient solar panel, and that's it, then you're making a grave mistake. This is my message. Don't consider only the efficiency. Consider also the toxicity. Make up your best solar panels that you can produce using non-toxic and abundant constituents. Now, regarding the question, okay, so the samples, as I said, were coming from Rome. They were shipped to us, to Jerusalem, and we have a laboratory, a clean laboratory that we basically built. This laboratory, we very carefully and cleanly dissolved the bones that we received from Rome, of these people going back in time more than 10,000 years. And then after dissolving them, we measured the amount, the concentration of lead and many other metals in them, not only lead. We measured 24 different metals, including calcium. And we basically look at the ratio of lead and other metals to calcium, to look for enrichment, to look for pollution. And we have also to correct with the fact that many of these people were buried in soil, in graves, thousands of years, or hundreds of years. And the burial might affect the metal concentration as well. You have all kinds of genetic effects. So you have to distinguish between the in vivo and the post-mortem concentrations. In lead, we have to think, again, based on our own work and work that Patterson and others have done, that we know how to distinguish, to tell apart the in vivo component from the post-mortem component. With other metals, such as, for instance, cadmium, which is also very toxic, or cobalt, we don't know. So once we get the concentration, we know it basically includes both in vivo metal either leached out or added to the sample after burial, and we cannot break them, we cannot tell them apart. With lead, we do, we can, and that's why we focus on lead, not because it's the only toxic element. No, there are numerous other toxic metals that people should be aware of and watch for them in the present and of course in the future. Cobalt is one of them, for instance. But for lead, we have the ability to create a reliable historical record. For the others, we're less safe ground in doing so.
Right. Yeah, you rightfully pointed out in the beginning, saying that, most of the entrepreneurs around the world are creating great innovations when it comes to solar panels, but unless and until we do not create a circular economy which is sustainable, I think we'll be creating more harm than creating good for the future. So I think this is the first time in human history that we have got a chance to correct the wrongs, because technology is that tool which is enabling us to understand us, our biology, space, and our environment much better. Now, I think it's only when people understand that how dangerous this toxic pollution that you're talking about is, unless and until they don't understand the clear and present danger, I think people do not change. So would you like to talk about how dangerous toxic pollution is in humans, children, and grown up?
Lead and the other metals which I mentioned, I didn't mention, for instance, mercury. There are numerous other toxic metals. They all interfere with our physiology, with different biochemical processes in our body. For instance, lead is affecting both heat production, digestive system, and more than anything else, it's affecting our neurological system, the central neurological system, basically creating all kinds of deficiencies. And people have shown, there is a guy named Herbert Needleman from New York. He showed back in the 70s the children with elevated concentrations of lead in their teeth. He basically took, children when they had the first round of teeth, shedding them, he brought them to him and he analyzed them for lead. And then he compared his results with reports of the teachers of these children, and he found a clear negative correlation between the levels of lead, the concentrations of lead in the teeth, and their performance in class, their IQ, and their social behavior. The more polluted were more aggressive, deficiencies in their ability to study new material and to perform in class and so forth. And he was sued actually by the metal industry performing this research, and he went to court and eventually he won. The first to pay the price will be the children. They are the most prone to the dangers imposed by lead and other toxic metals because of the fast rate of metabolism and the fact that they grow up and they use more efficiently whatever they inhale, whatever they take up into their body. They're also very sensitive to the toxic effects.
And you said somebody who was trying to bring forward the truth was sued by the industry people. So I hope that the general population and the larger population understand what's going on and create a concerted effort to correct these wrongs. Would you have data, a global data of sorts, of how bad is this globally? The research was done only in specific area, or would you have data around the world? Which place at this point in time has got the most toxic pollution when it comes to lead pollution in the world at this point in time?
It's a good question. No, the answer is I don't have the data. Although it's not a very complicated analysis to perform, lead content of the blood or the blood lead content is not being analyzed routinely. So there's lead pollution in Flint, Michigan, USA, a few years ago, where people were exposed to lead coming from their plumbing system. By the way, the word plumbing in English comes from the word plumbum, which is lead in Latin, because the Romans were using lead, the byproduct of search for silver, to produce their plumbing system.
You mentioned that the clean energy revolution is going to be one of the major new source of pollution when it comes to lead-based pollution. What are the traditional industries which use lead as the main ingredient? Lead paint, I believe, is one of them. And which are the current industries which are using are amongst the largest lead polluters in the world?
For decades, alkyl lead compounds were added to gasoline to improve efficiency of engines, car engines. And in most countries in the world now, they are not used anymore, but I think there are still some countries which add lead to their gasoline. The alkyl lead compounds are even more toxic because the organometallic compound, lead alkyl, is very soluble in fatty tissues and it penetrates the body and it can reach our brain and basically kill us within days. The only good thing is that once you add it to the gasoline, it's more soluble in the gasoline than in our body. So once it's in the gasoline, it's not as dangerous. Alkyl lead is really phasing out and it's very good. Also, as you mentioned, lead in paint, in most countries, but not universally, they are not being used anymore. But batteries, most car batteries are made of lead. And this is the danger in, for instance, the fact that if you produce solar energy, you have to store energy throughout the night. And here you have alternatives. you can do, for instance, hydrogen cells instead of leaded batteries, or different types of batteries using sodium instead, or even lithium, which is not as toxic. It's not toxic. Lithium is actually being administered to people with bipolar syndrome as a medicine. So there are alternatives. We just have to be aware of it. We cannot, in solving environmental problem, we have to be more holistic in our approach and not Western goal-oriented engineers, to take into consideration other aspects as well. And this is the main message that I'm bringing forward.
What do you think should be the urgent measures or regulations implemented to possibly reverse this lead poisoning?
First of all, recycling. And in the process of even designing the new generation of cell phones, of computers, they have to consider the recycling efficiency and the recycling ease as one of the goals of the design. And recycling is very important, but you have to do recycling in a proper way. You cannot do it, it's not a backyard operation. And I know that in many countries, there are a lot of recycling operations which basically endanger the local population. I think, for instance, in China, it takes place a lot, and in other countries as well.
What would the world look like in 10 years if we continue towards the acceleration of technology and creating innovation blindly? What would be the drawback of lead pollution if we do not control it in 10 years' time? How dangerous do you think the world is going to look in 10 years' time?
It's a tough question. I'm not sure I have definitely I don't have a quantitative answer to this. I can only say in very general terms that we probably will encounter more cases, many more cases of people with elevated concentrations and symptoms of pollution, of lead pollution and other metal pollutions. Some of them are carcinogenic, some of them are not. But the real danger is not the acoustic concentrations, but the chronic exposure and what this will do to our nature, to our attitude towards others. Make people, lead toxicity, for instance, make people more nervous, more aggressive. There are reports, for instance, published to claim that some of the decline in crime in the US has to do with the phasing out of leaded gasoline in the 70s, and the fact that children born in the 70s and 80s and 90s, inner cities children, are less exposed to lead pollution and therefore became less aggressive and less criminal, crime-oriented. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. But this is some of the things that I'm worried about. That if we don't consider toxicity in our design of new products for solar panels and for energy storage and so forth, we'll encounter more and more issues related to lead and other metal toxicity, and especially chronic defects that are more difficult to assess and to eliminate.
Because of COVID, because of the pandemic, the digitization of the world has been accelerated, and it has made us think that we need to move from a traditional ways to the new world. And the new world talks about technology. The new world talks about artificial intelligence. It talks about clean energy. It talks about so many other things. And all the tech companies talk about the promises that this new world is going to bring, the promise of abundance and promise of great life. But like you said, we need to also address this new world that we are building with care and a little more thought, because in the effort of creating a new world with a lot of enthusiasm, we could be creating something much bad. What would be your request or last as a message to the industries or people around the world when it comes to the lead pollution?
In the process of selecting and designing and manufacturing the best devices for energy production and energy storage, toxicity and abundance should be taken into consideration and should be helping us in selecting the appropriate materials for these products. Otherwise, we'll create more problems than we solve.
Right. I hope and I wish that our innovators and these big companies who laying down the foundation of the future of energy, solar panels, batteries and all are listening and have a vision of building a world which is more safer rather than just something which is only profitable. So thank you for being part of Change I Am Possible podcast. Really appreciate you taking time and being part of the show. And to my listeners, if you like what you see and hear, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Really appreciate this.
Bye-bye.